On August 2nd, 2012, in a quiet Dallas suburb, Rachel Donovan made a choice that would lead her down a path of betrayal and murder. What began as an illicit affair with her husband's best friend spiraled into a deadly game of deception. By the time the truth came to light, it was too late to turn back. Blood had been spilled, and the lives of everyone involved would be changed forever. Rachel Donovan, 28 years old, had always considered herself content in her marriage to Tom, who was 30. They had been married for 5 years, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. Tom had a good job as an IT consultant. They lived in a comfortable home in a Dallas suburb, and their lives appeared stable. However, beneath the surface, Rachel felt an unsettling restlessness. Tom's frequent work trips left her alone more often than she liked. Each time he left, she felt a growing sense of loneliness that gnawed at her. It was during one of these trips in early October 2012 that Rachel found herself spending more time with Rick Crawford, her husband's best friend. Rick, at 61, was nearly twice her age, a retired police officer with a magnetic presence. He had always been a part of their lives, like an uncle figure, someone who had known Tom since childhood and had been there for him through thick and thin. Rick would often drop by to check on Rachel whenever Tom was away, a gesture that had seemed innocent enough at first. Their relationship began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. What started as simple, friendly conversations over coffee turned into longer visits. Rick had a way of making Rachel feel seen, something she realized she had been craving more than she knew. He would listen intently as she talked about her life, her frustrations, and her dreams. His authoritative demeanor, the way he seemed so sure of himself, drew her in. Rachel found herself looking forward to his visits more and more, each time feeling a bit more drawn to him. On October 15th, 2012, Tom left for a week-long business trip. That evening, Rachel invited Rick over for dinner. It was just supposed to be a friendly meal, something to pass the time while Tom was away. But as the evening progressed, the atmosphere between them began to change. They laughed and talked more openly than they had before, and the conversation became more personal, more intimate. By the time Rick was ready to leave, there was a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. As they stood at the door, saying their goodbyes, Rick leaned in and kissed Rachel. It was a brief kiss, just a moment of weakness, but it set off a spark that neither of them could deny. Rachel pulled back, shocked at what had just happened. But before she could say anything, Rick apologized and left quickly, leaving her standing there, her heart racing. That night, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. She knew it was wrong, but there was something about it that thrilled her, something that made her feel alive, in a way she hadn't in years. The next day, Rick called to apologize again, but instead of ending things there, they found themselves talking for hours. The connection between them had been ignited, and neither was willing to let it go. Over the next few days, they exchanged secret messages and met in person whenever they could. The excitement of sneaking around, the thrill of doing something forbidden, drew them closer. They began meeting at Rick's ranch, a secluded spot outside of town where no one would find them. Their affair quickly escalated from stolen kisses to passionate encounters, each one more intense than the last. By the time December 2012 rolled around, their affair had been going on for nearly 3 months. Rachel and Rick had become more reckless, meeting more frequently, and communicating through secret phones to avoid detection. The thrill of their forbidden relationship made them bolder, taking risks they wouldn't have considered before. But their actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Mary Thompson, a 45-year-old neighbor who lived across the street from the Donovans, had always been the observant type. She noticed things that others might overlook, and she had started to notice Rick's car parked outside Rachel's house more often than seemed normal. At first, she didn't think much of it. Rick had always been close to Tom, so it wasn't unusual for him to stop by. But as the days went on, and Tom was away more frequently, Mary couldn't help but wonder if something was going on. On December 20th, 2012, during the annual neighborhood Christmas party, Mary's curiosity got the better of her. She casually mentioned to Tom that she had seen Rick around a lot lately, especially when he was out of town. Mary made it sound like a joke, not wanting to cause any trouble, but she noticed the way Tom's expression changed when she said it. He laughed it off, thanking her for her concern, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, after the party, Tom couldn't stop thinking about what Mary had said. He replayed the conversation in his head, trying to convince himself that it was nothing. But the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Rachel had been acting differently lately, distracted, distant, and always on her phone. Tom began to suspect that something might be wrong. He didn't confront Rachel right away. Instead, he decided to observe her more closely, watching for any signs that might confirm his growing fears. In the days that followed, Tom's suspicion only grew. He noticed Rachel was more secretive, often taking her phone calls in another room, her conversations hushed. She started leaving the house at odd hours, claiming she was going shopping or meeting friends. But Tom noticed that she would often be gone longer than usual. The nagging feeling in his gut told him that something was off, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. As Christmas approached, the tension between them began to build. Rachel, caught up in her affair with Rick, barely noticed the change in Tom. She was too consumed by the excitement of her secret life, too blinded by the thrill of what she was doing. But Tom was watching her every move, determined to find out the truth, even if it meant his worst fears were confirmed. On the cold morning of January 5th, 2013, Tom Donovan returned home from what was supposed to be a 2-day business trip. He had finished his work early and decided to surprise Rachel. But when he walked into the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel wasn't in the living room where she usually waited for him, and the house had a strange stillness to it. Tom set his bags down and called out for her, but there was no response. As he moved through the house, Tom's eyes fell on Rachel's phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. Normally, Rachel was very protective of her phone, always keeping it close. But today, it was just sitting there, unlocked. A knot tightened in Tom's stomach as he reached for it. He knew he shouldn't invade her privacy, but the doubt that had been building inside him for months pushed him to do it. With shaking hands, he opened the messages. What he found made his blood run cold. Dozens of text messages between Rachel and Rick, all from the last few weeks. They weren't just casual texts. They were intimate, filled with details about secret meetings, feelings, and their growing attachment. Each message confirmed his worst fears. Rachel wasn't just having an affair, she was having it with his best friend. Tom's heart pounded as he scrolled through the messages, his mind racing with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. The man he had trusted most in the world had been sneaking around with his wife behind his back. Tom didn't confront Rachel immediately. He needed proof, something solid that would confirm everything without a shadow of a doubt. He decided to gather evidence to ensure there was no denying what was happening. That same day, he drove to an electronics store and bought a GPS tracker, along with a small, hidden camera. He spent the next few days carefully installing the tracker on Rachel's car and setting up the camera in their bedroom, all without her knowing. Each move was deliberate, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. On January 10th, 2013, Tom set his plan in motion. He told Rachel he had another business trip, but this time he wasn't really going anywhere. He packed his bags, kissed her goodbye, and left the house as if everything was normal. But instead of heading to the airport, Tom parked his car a few blocks away from their house and waited. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his emotions a volatile mix of rage and heartbreak. It didn't take long for the GPS tracker to send an alert to his phone. Rachel had left the house and was heading toward Rick's ranch. Tom's heart raced as he started his car and followed at a safe distance. Every mile felt like an eternity as he replayed the messages in his mind, his anger building with each passing minute. When he finally arrived at Rick's ranch, he parked his car far enough away to avoid being seen and approached the house on foot. The ranch was quiet, surrounded by thick woods that made it feel even more isolated. Tom moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the soft earth. He approached the house cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the side of the house, he peered through one of the windows and saw them, Rachel and Rick, together. They were sitting close on the couch, laughing, and sharing a moment that should have belonged to Tom. The sight of them together confirmed everything. Tom's worst fears weren't just suspicions, they were reality. Tom's anger boiled over as he watched them. Without thinking, he burst into the house, his rage driving him forward. Rachel and Rick jumped up in shock as Tom stormed into the living room. Rachel tried to explain, stammering something about it not being what it looked like. But Tom wasn't listening. His world had just collapsed, and the betrayal cut too deep. All he could see was red. Rick sensing the danger, stepped between them, trying to calm Tom down. He held up his hands, trying to reason with him, but Tom was beyond reason. The sight of his best friend standing there, the man who had betrayed him, was too much. Tom snapped, his fury exploding in an instant. His eyes caught sight of the fireplace poker resting against the hearth. Before he even realized what he was doing, he grabbed it. With a roar of anger, Tom swung the poker at Rick, the metal making a sickening thud as it connected with Rick's head. Rick's eyes went wide with shock as he crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. Rachel screamed, the reality of what had just happened hitting her like a wave. She dropped to her knees beside Rick, sobbing uncontrollably. But he was already gone. Tom stood frozen, the bloodied poker still in his hand, as the gravity of what he had done began to sink in. Rick, his best friend since he was a child, was dead. The man who had been like a brother to him now lay lifeless on the floor, and it was Tom's hand that had killed him. The affair that had once thrilled Rachel had now turned into a nightmare that neither of them could escape. Panic set in as the reality of their situation hit them both. They had to cover this up, make it look like something else, anything but what it really was. Rachel, still shaking and crying, helped Tom wipe down the house, erasing any evidence that might link them to Rick's death. They ransacked the living room, knocking over furniture, pulling out drawers, and scattering items around to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. All the while, Rick's body lay motionless on the floor, a silent witness to their frantic efforts. As night fell, Tom wrapped Rick's body in a blanket, struggling with the weight of his own guilt as much as the physical burden. He carried Rick out to his car, the cold night air biting at his skin. They drove to a remote part of the woods, far from the ranch, where they knew no one would stumble upon the scene. Tom dug a shallow grave, the hard earth resisting each thrust of the shovel, as Rachel stood by, too numb to speak. They buried Rick in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. By the time they returned home, it was early morning, and they were both exhausted, physically and emotionally. They went through the motions of cleaning up, but the weight of what they had done hung heavy in the air. The house that had once been a home was now filled with a suffocating silence, the walls holding secrets too dark to ever be spoken. On January 12th, 2013, Rick was reported missing after he failed to show up for his weekly fishing trip with friends. The police were called and an investigation was launched. But with no immediate leads, the case quickly grew cold. Tom and Rachel tried to go back to their normal lives, but nothing was the same. Rachel became withdrawn, haunted by nightmares of that night, while Tom buried himself in his work, desperate to forget what he had done. For weeks, they lived with the fear of being discovered, each day a torturous waiting game. The strain of keeping the secret weighed on them both, the guilt gnawing at them from the inside. Then, on March 6th, 2013, 2 months after Rick's disappearance, their worst fear came true. A hiker, out for a walk in the woods, stumbled upon the shallow grave. The body was badly decomposed, but dental records confirmed it was Rick Crawford. The police quickly reopened the investigation, now treating it as a homicide. Detectives interviewed Tom, Rachel, and others in the community, trying to piece together what had happened. Suspicion quickly fell on Tom after neighbors mentioned the tension in his marriage and Rick's close relationship with Rachel. Tom tried to keep his composure, but the pressure of the investigation weighed heavily on him. On March 15, 2013, Rachel was brought in for questioning. By this time, she was on the brink of a breakdown, the stress and guilt overwhelming her. Under the pressure of the interrogation, she confessed to the affair, but denied any involvement in Rick's death. Her story was inconsistent, her alibi shaky, and her conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicions. The walls were closing in, and the secret they had fought so hard to keep was about to be exposed, with consequences they could no longer escape. On March 20th, 2013, the police obtained a warrant to search the Donovan household. During the search, they found traces of blood in the living room, despite the couple's attempts to clean up. The evidence was enough to arrest Tom for Rick's murder. Rachel, though not charged initially, was taken in for further questioning. As the case went to trial, the full extent of the affair and the murder was laid bare before the court. Prosecutors painted a picture of a marriage on the rocks, a wife seeking excitement in the arms of her husband's best friend, and a man driven to kill by the ultimate betrayal. Tom's defense team argued that the murder was not premeditated, but a crime of passion, committed in the heat of the moment. Rachel Donovan was called to the stand on May 12, 2013. She looked small and fragile as she took her place, her eyes avoiding Tom's as she settled into the witness chair. The courtroom was silent as she began her testimony, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the events that had led to Rick's death. Rachel explained how the affair had started, how it had quickly spiraled out of control, and how she had become caught up in the excitement of it all. She admitted that she had been careless, that she hadn't considered the consequences of her actions. But she insisted that she had never wanted anyone to get hurt, that she had never thought it would end in violence. On June 15, 2013, after weeks of testimony, the jury found Tom Donovan guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Rachel, though spared a prison sentence, became a pariah in her community. The affair and its deadly outcome destroyed her reputation, leaving her isolated and broken. The once quiet neighborhood in Dallas would never be the same. The murder of Rick Crawford became a cautionary tale, a dark chapter in the lives of those who knew him. Rachel and Tom's marriage, built on lies and deception, had ended in tragedy, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. It's funny how the main villain, the woman, got away almost unscathed. That brings us to another case we have here, Wife's affair with mother-in-law ends in deadly murder. This case had me thinking hard about how one decision could change the lives of everyone around you.